We're going to talk about a few projects that we've done that specifically relate to kind of our interest in kind of music as a form of kind of collective resistance and kind of political speech. And we're going to start with Dump It on Parliament Revisited, which was a commission by Bedford Creative Arts. We kind of produced it in collaboration with the musician Roshi Nasehi. And it kind of started with us finding this kind of compilation cassette from 1986 where loads of kind of punk bands came together to write protest songs about a proposed nuclear waste dump in Bedford. And we were kind of really interested in kind of that as a kind of moment of sort of collective resistance and kind of creative, community-centred kind of action. Also a moment that was kind of part of a larger social movement that was really successful. Like it was called Bedford Against Nuclear Dumping, and this kind of collective action managed to kind of stop this nuclear waste dump from happening, from becoming a kind of thing.
And also usually punk culture, usually on the fringes of society, it was a moment in time where they came together with mainstream society as well to collaborate on this, which was very interesting.
So to kind of reactivate this and bring it into the kind of public kind of knowledge again in kind of Luton, we were working in a kind of library and kind of looking at sort of performative notions of kind of archive and alternative kind of storytelling. So we just decided to kind of use the original kind of conversation cassette as a kind of active resource, and we found kind of current bands to do a cover version of one of the original tracks and then to write a new song of protest based on what they wanted to kind of dump on Parliament today. So this is one of the shortest tracks I'll play, which is a cover of a track by Click Click, that are really interesting kind of experimental electronic kind of punk kind of sound called She's Chewing Them.
She's chewing them, she's biting them. Embrace the pain, every stop your line. Chewing them, she's biting them. Embrace the pain, every stop your line. The best mother's day, play, play, play. The best mother's day, play, play, play. She's chewing them, she's biting them.
In terms of responding, the bands, there was a kind of parallel that the 80s had with 2014 and 2015, the recession in the UK, and at that point lots of local councils had their budgets cut. Young people were feeling that in terms of local colleges losing certain courses, funding towards different services that were once happening for many years, and so there was still the same uncertainty that existed in the 80s with the contemporary situation, and it was a way of starting a dialogue as to what they want to dump on Parliament today.
And like a cross-generational kind of knowledge exchange. So like quite often when we start a project, we don't really know how it's going to pan out or what's going to happen, and we try and bring in kind of different people to kind of be part of that. And we were really privileged to be able to kind of bring in Steve Spon from UK Decay. UK Decay, I don't know if anyone's have heard of that. They were the biggest kind of post-punk band to come out of Luton, but they're kind of coined with kind of creating the term goth, like goth music. But yeah, Spon was such an amazing kind of figure within the community, and like after UK Decay imploded, he set up a DIY kind of recording studio in the 33 Arts Centre, and then went on to be really central to the kind of Exodus rave scene as well, which I kind of caught the kind of back end of. But anyway, so we brought Steve in as kind of co-producer, and he kind of worked with the kind of bands to engage with them, look at the tracks that they were kind of doing, kind of expand that and fed into the recording process, which we kind of turned the library into a kind of recording studio. And we then kind of built up to a large kind of community event. So we had 6 bands, we had a kind of youth theatre group, we had kind of local sort of DIY kind of print print kind of group doing kind of work there, and we kind of put on this kind of spectacle which sort of merged the library and the theatre, and kind of it became a kind of spectacle of kind of shared kind of creative resistance about what people wanted to dump in Parliament.
There was also technology which was forgotten nowadays with all the IT. Back then it was cut up collage and some of these things that young people didn't really that now haven't engaged with and had the chance to create the posters and all the kind of printing that existed in terms of social media. That was the way of doing it back then. So it was a change in thinking and how you approach this idea of spreading the word.
So this is one of the bands kind of talking about the track that they chose to kind of cover, and kind of how they.
It's Believe in Me by Party Girls. It's fantastic. The guitar work is just brilliant, and it's really 80s goth sort of. You're obviously quite Bauhaus influence. It's a really cool song. And I think managing to decipher a few of the lyrics, it might be to do with a lot of the controversy around communication and sort of what is the truth. You never quite know what to believe.
Believe in me. Believe in me. I can't believe a single word you say. Your message comes through, but not effectively.
Yeah, we couldn't decipher all the lyrics, but that's kind of what we got from it, so hopefully we've kind of got the right message.
We're really interested in that kind of process of how you couldn't really completely hear the original recording. We probably had like a recording of a recording of a recording of a recording. So a lot of the kind of sound quality was lost. So there was instantly this process of like the bands having to kind of listen through, choose a track, and then kind of reinterpret it in a kind of contemporary sort of context and through their own kind of lens and kind of emotional response to the music. And then we also kind of worked with a youth group as well who were kind of connected to the theatre, so it's like a youth theatre group. And initially we didn't really have any idea like what would kind of come out of that kind of exchange. But again, we kind of brought in different people who were kind of part of that post-punk scene. So we had David Stubbs, who's a music journalist, but he started his career doing a fanzine. He did a workshop with the young people where they created their own fanzine, the Cauldron of Hormones. Cauldron of Hormones, am I saying that right then?
Yep.
And that then fed in them doing a kind of improvised kind of music making session with Graham Doddle from Peer Ubu, and then they wrote their own track and they kind of performed that with the other bands at the kind of gig. So again, it kind of created this kind of larger process of kind of exchange and kind of opportunity for the kind of young people again to kind of connect with kind of very different forms of kind of learning to what they kind of experienced at school. Like their track ultimately became about their kind of frustration with education system and exams and removal of coursework and kind of how they were being kind of sort of forced to kind of learn and kind of be in a certain way through kind of school. The next project that we're going to talk about again started with kind of looking into kind of archives and looking into the past and kind of past forms of kind of creative kind of resistance. We were kind of commissioned to do a project by Create London. It was to create an audio and kind of print guide for the River Lee, this kind of leeway walk that linked the Olympic Park to kind of East India Docks. So it's like a really kind of historic and kind of significant kind of area in kind of London. And we were looking into the sort of political history of the river and its relationship to kind of work, particularly to the kind of widening notion of kind of unions. There's this kind of birth of kind of new unionism, which was like the shift from kind of guilds into kind of wider trade unions that kind of played out along this kind of river. And it kind of all started with this group of women who were the kind of matchmakers, who was really kind of considered to be the kind of lowest of the low in terms of trade and kind of status, staging a huge protest and getting the kind of match company to kind of concede to their demands. And they had this song, the Match Girls song. We'll hang old Brian on the sour apple tree. We'll hang old Brian on the sour apple tree. We'll hang old Brian on the sour apple tree as we mow marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. And we were kind of interested in how that was steeped into this kind of East End tradition of rough music, and how that kind of connected with kind of contemporary kind of grime culture and the notion of the diss track. So it kind of set about the idea of creating kind of contemporary kind of grime tracks that sort of mashed the kind of history with the kind of present of the kind of river.
Again, with that area, change is ongoing as well. It's undergoing a massive transformation once again. And so where, you know, there were issues around labour back then, the similar issues in relation to things like zero-hour contracts are still happening in the UK currently as well. And it's a growing concern of people that have, you know, we've been talking about it today, been born in this area and slowly feel that they're being pushed out through kind of social cleansing. And the conversation that we had with these young people, which we'll go into in a moment, was all about how they felt reflecting on this massive change around them, waking up and walking to school and seeing this massive set of towers, Canary Wharf in the background, these banks that they can't connect to and don't know how to relate to, and also how the Olympic Park, that massive transformation affected them, and whether or not it did have an effect and how they felt about it. So those concerns are kind of transferring back to and connecting to the past and to the now, and trying to create some music from it.
Hello fellow waste slaves, all your life just trying to get paid, no food on your plate but you still gotta eat, so you gotta work, sleep and repeat. Corporations don't give a F about you or me, faceless companies just wanna make peace. One day slaves, been this way since 1888 and ain't nothing changed. 6 years don't wanna pay me my raise, the poor feed the rich, they don't want me saying this shit. Yo, can I get a bonus? You better pay us what you owe us. Yes please, can I get my piece? Mouth to feed, so we hang gold brand on the apple tree.
So this is at Spotlight Youth Centre, and it's a youth centre that's in Langdon Park in East London, and every week there is a class for grime music run by Ebbs and Rapid, who are members of the Rough Squad, which was one of the first East London grime crews to emerge, and they have also developed a foundation for the arts since. We decided to connect with them because we thought that this historical document of rough music that existed in the East End could be connected with a contemporary version, which would be grime, also originating in the East London area.
We also initially did a print guide, which was kind of based on our interest in kind of LARP and kind of embodied performance and reenactment of history, and we were trying to work with these young people to create these kind of LARP, live action role play kind of exercises, and they couldn't really give a shit about LARP or like our want for them to kind of do that, and all that they were doing was kind of listening to their kind of grime music and trying to write bars, and it was like, okay, it makes a lot more sense if we want to be having these kind of conversations about the political history of the area, that we find a kind of a way that they actually are going to want to do that and going to feel kind of empowered to kind of talk through. So yeah, grime as a kind of young people's political language became a really kind of rich kind of way of kind of motivating these kind of young people to kind of engage with archived material. Like there, you very much heard him kind of riffing off kind of past elements of kind of history, referencing kind of certain events and kind of engaging in a way that wouldn't have happened if we weren't kind of using grime. But we ended up kind of producing 4 different tracks, each track responding to a kind of specific 5 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, well, we produced 4 tracks. We then went on to produce a music video, partly because young people really wanted to share it, and they kind of said if we can't share the video, if we don't have a video, we can't really kind of share it or get people to watch it. I'll just play like.
I used to be part of your community. Immigrant or not, it didn't matter. There was unity. I can't believe that things changed so fast. I wanted a better future. Who knew we were going back to the past?
Back to the past, back to the past, they wanna go back to the past.
But what was really important for us there is we also took them to kind of Parliament and kind of performed their message right on kind of Parliament Square, and kind of involved them directly in terms of like how they wanted the video to be staged, what they wanted the kind of message to be, where they wanted it to be. So it was really kind of bringing them into the kind of process of kind of running what we managed to get some money to do to kind of make the kind of video happen. I'm going to whiz past this.
Is it online?
It's online, yeah. It's all. It's all the
Grime Up the River. If you type that on Google, you'll come to the Bandcamp page.
So that kind of takes us into what we did for the last kind of workshop for OpenSet, which again is kind of going back into this notion of looking at past forms of kind of creative kind of resistance. Specifically, we were kind of looking at the time that Irena kind of asked us to kind of respond to kind of this notion of rhythms, kind of agitprop theatre, and the kind of use specifically of this kind of notion of kind of mass recitation. So we were kind of interested in kind of agitprop, particularly within the kind of British workers' theatre movement, which was like 1920s to 30s, and has obviously kind of come from kind of Russian kind of avant-garde sort of performance, but how they were kind of using kind of forms of rhythm, in this case like voice and kind of body, to create something that's instantly kind of impactful and could be performed on the streets, outside factories, to kind of really kind of create kind of call for action to kind of workers, or to kind of try and incite kind of social change. So we were looking at the kind of structural kind of rhythms and kind of patterns of mass recitation as a form, and kind of how that was kind of used to kind of create a kind of dramatic form of kind of collective political speech. Should we read this?
Yeah.
So, workers' theatre, workers' theatre,
Workers' theatre.
The theatre of workers like yourselves.
Who play in every town and country.
To workers like yourselves.
Workers' theatre, workers' theatre, workers' theatre.
Anyone else?
We show the life of working men and women.
Their hardship and their hunger. Their struggle to exist.
Workers' theatre,
Workers' theatre, workers' theatre.
So we were interested in these kind of patterns of kind of rhythm. And I'll just read this quote because this was very kind of central to what we ultimately kind of decided to come and kind of do here. So the mass recitation was perhaps the most innovative agitprop form, and the one that most clearly modelled the aesthetics of revolutionary modernism. As a polyphonic chorus, it could achieve a percussive musicality familiar today in hip-hop, and it may be that the first New York mass recitations were influenced by African-American oral poetry. So we were really interested in how this kind of related to kind of local culture here, how it related to kind of past forms of kind of African kind of music to kind of Surinamese music, and kind of how that had fed into kind of contemporary kind of hip-hop culture. So we kind of came and kind of worked with the local kind of hip-hop artist, Mitsmo, I'm terrible with kind of pronunciation, and the kind of rest of the group to kind of produce a kind of collective mass recitation kind of responding to Belma. And again, we were kind of directly looking at the kind of structure. We read through a load of scripts and we pulled out specific methods that we kind of instantly started to reimagine. So we looked at kind of repetition here, the kind of repetition of kind of down with, like the chorus, kind of down with it. We looked at kind of question and answer. So here you have the kind of contrast between the kind of strength of the group with like individual concerns. So workers of the world unite. What have we got to lose? Our chains. What have we got to win? The whole world. And we were kind of interested in this quite kind of didactic kind of form of kind of speech and kind of playing out a kind of argument. And then ultimately what we kind of focused on kind of collectively through the workshop was this kind of use of stereotyped kind of characters or kind of archetypes, kind of engaging in an argument or discussion to kind of deliver a message. So like in this extract here, you have the kind of capitalist and the kind of worker as a way of kind of directly kind of playing out what the kind of workers wanted to kind of engage. So worker, the concept, capitalist, the conception of yours contradicts the age-old definition of art. Worker, the conception of ours contradicts the age-old definition of bourgeois art. Capitalist, this means destruction of culture. Worker, this means the destruction of a decayed culture of oppression and exploitation. So again, there's a direct kind of pattern there of the kind of, almost like kind of rhyming couplets of responding from the kind of capitalist to the worker to deliver a kind of message. So we had to kind of collectively sort of play out, kind of characters that had kind of meaning and significance to people.
I think we have some of the participants here. Hands up.
Yeah.
Great, yeah.
So here we had architect's vision, we had the jungle, we had open window, and we had the displays. So everyone kind of found their characters, played out these kind of conversations, and then from that we kind of created these kind of collective chants. So there's this kind of process of having to kind of improvise, kind of re-script, and kind of develop the kind of chants. And I'm just going to play a short extract.
Hello stranger, I'm a bird sitting on the wall. What on earth are you looking for?
I'm looking for Utopia. I've come to experience the modernist dream. I'm looking for the buildings with the clean lines and uniform structures.
Utopia. What else are you looking for?
I'm looking for the perfect balance of living around nature.
Utopia. What else are you looking for?
Happy people living in harmony.
Utopia. What else are you looking for? Utopia. There's no utopia.
No utopia. What about the modernist dream?
Utopia. The modernist dream no longer exists.
Utopia.
The modernist heroes have been torn down.
Utopia. What about the perfect balance of living around nature?
Utopia. The perfect balance of living around nature no longer exists.
Utopia.
But you can see 1,000 pieces of trash from 1,000 vibrant cultures.
Utopia. What about people living in harmony?
Utopia. People no longer live in harmony, but you can see rich home buyers scaring your neighbors to move away.
Utopia. There is no utopia. There is no utopia.
There is no utopia.
There is no utopia.
And then we also touched upon the kind of notion of kind of choreography as well, and kind of creating specific movements that related to the kind of message within the kind of recitation script. But again, it really was about this kind of process of kind of collective exchange and kind of discourse that came from this shared motivation of trying to produce a mass recitation script, very much in a similar line to the kind of previous projects that we'd shown. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.